Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. I hope you're having a great Wednesday. We are so excited to have you here for Week 1 Secrets, how to leave a lasting impression on new employees. To get the ball rolling, get the chat rolling a little bit, let's introduce where we're from. So I am tuning in from Dallas-Fort Worth, specifically Denton. A lot of people don't know Denton, but Dallas-Fort Worth. What about you, LeAnne? Where are you tuning in from today?
I am tuning in from Lubbock, Texas. So not terribly far from you, but Texas, Texas far, I guess.
Yeah, Texas far. You can drive for 8 hours and
Yeah.
not even be out of Texas. I definitely get where you're coming from. Looks like we have a couple other Texans, some Florida, all over the place. Oh, I see we have another from Lubbock as well, LeAnne. So
Woohoo.
uh, Texas Tech. But see some Houston. Our headquarters is actually in Houston, so that's exciting. But anyway, we just love to have all of y'all joining in today. We're so thankful you're here. Just a couple little housekeeping things before we get started. I will be sharing the SHRM and HRCI codes at the end of the webinar in the chat, so make sure you stay around and tune in for those. I'll be sending both those out. Additionally, I will be sending out the recording and the slides after the webinar, most likely tomorrow, but possibly today. So be on the lookout for that. Then if you have any questions during the webinar, any comments, feel free to put them in the Q&A or in the chat, and I'll be sure to monitor them from the background. So with that, LeAnne, do you want to get started?
Let's do it. Thanks so much, Kaylee. And hi, everyone. I am so excited to get a chance to talk with you today about one of my very favorite topics, although I do say that a lot, and I probably shouldn't because everything sort of feels like my favorite. But we're going to be talking about really how to leverage your communication during the onboarding phase, and in particular, during that week 1, when an employee is brand new to the organization, whether they are face-to-face or remote or hybrid employee. We're going to talk about some strategies that you can use to really maximize the messaging that you're sending to those employees during that crucial first week. Because here's the bad news. The bad news is that according to the Gallup organization, statistically, if you think about your employees, statistically, only 1 in 10 of them would agree that your organization does a good job onboarding. Now, that is the kind of stuff that keeps HR and people and culture leaders up at night. And you may feel like your organization is doing a much better job. Maybe you've put a lot of time and effort into it, but the reality is that most organizations leave a lot on the table when it comes to their onboarding experience. And there's so many reasons for that, right? I mean, you know that we're wearing 5 million different hats. We're trying to keep operations running. And so to think strategically about that onboarding experience, we have to pause. We have to really think about it. And so it makes sense why maybe this is something where we're leaving a lot, on the table. But when organizations invest in their onboarding experience, they see all sorts of positive impacts. For example, employees who agree that the onboarding process was exceptional, they're 2 times more likely to say during that onboarding phase that they feel fully prepared to excel in their new role. That's very big because we know that at the beginning of an employee's tenure in an organization, there's actually heightened levels of uncertainty and anxiety about the ability to execute on the role, right? So that's huge. Secondly, those employees also are 2.3 times as likely to say that their job is as good or better than they expected it to be. So there is a mandate, I think, for HR leaders, for people and culture leaders to really spend time thinking about how we are engaging with those new employees during that crucial, week 1. And here's the thesis, if you will, of my presentation and what we'll spend our time talking about today is this idea that for us to have exceptional onboarding experiences, that's going to require us to reverse engineer our communication so that we're driving engagement and retention. And so what it requires is for us to say, what does it take for employees, not just new employees, but employees in general, to feel engaged and positive about the future that they have in our organizations? And how can we reverse engineer our communication so that during that first week, we're sending those messages that are going to drive engagement and retention? And so that's where I come in. I'm not going to spend much time sort of introducing myself, except to say that when you hang with me, what you're going to get is a lot of information on the role that strategic communication plays in our HR processes and our people and culture processes. So my background is actually in higher education. I was a professor at Texas Tech University in Lubbock, Texas, where I'm, calling in from today. But I was a professor there in the Department of Communication Studies for 14 years. And so my areas of kind of specialty relate around strategic communication and organizational communication. I've been working as an HR people ops consultant and keynote speaker since 2017. And so sort of my sweet spot is that area where employee engagement and retention connects with strategic communication. So that's what we're going to be focusing on today. Specifically, we're going to talk about 5 critical messages that new hires need to hear during week 1. We're going to talk about some different techniques and some different ideas that you can use to deliver those messages to your new hires, and also think through some ways that you can assess the effectiveness of your week 1 messages. Now, I do have to say before we jump in to these critical messages that, as is often the case with the people and culture and HR leaders that I work with, it's easy to sort of create a shame to-do list, if you will. Like, we're going to talk about a lot of different options that you could use in your organization, a lot of different ideas. My hope is not that you leave our time together today feeling just a burden of, oh, I'm not doing this well, I'm not doing this well, I'm not doing this well, but rather that you would take this information back to your people, right? Whoever those internal stakeholders are, and you would figure out the ways, these ideas, how they could work in your unique culture and your unique organization. My role is to help stimulate your thinking. That's what I always hope to do in these sessions. So let's go ahead and jump in and talk about the first critical message that new hires need to hear during week 1. And it's the hill that I often will say I want to die on when it comes to onboarding, is the message, we've been expecting you. Now, that you may not hear that and think that sounds just tremendously profound, but let me tell you, in my experience, that this is an area where a lot of organizations really miss the mark, and they don't realize that the way that they are behaving during week 1, the messages even they send prior to week 1 are still are communicating a frantic or chaotic kind of nature to employees. They're communicating to employees that, their presence on day 1 is a surprise. So in fact, this is one of my favorite cartoons, right? Messages that we send to new hires, by the way, I'm not telling anybody you're coming. No, nothing's going to be ready for you. You're not even going to have a desk, right? So you can just wing it. And, it's funny because when I present on onboarding, I hear lots of sort of horror stories that float up from people. I talked to one individual not too long ago who told me that when she showed up for day 1, that the team and the leader had forgotten that she was coming, and they were on like a retreat. And she was there completely by herself. Now, that may sound like a bit of an extreme example, but the point is that those kinds of messages are detrimental to any future engagement or retention. So what we want to do is we want to think about and really do some perspective taking about how employees are feeling when they begin a new job. So that empathy, that perspective taking is very important. If you think about it, when you start a new job, you are probably feeling uncertainty about the new role and the responsibility, right? Am I going to be good at this? Will I meet expectations? What exactly is my day-to-day going to be like? So you're asking a lot of questions around your role and your responsibilities. You're also likely experiencing heightened levels of uncertainty about new people and new relationships. Will I fit in? Will I belong? What is everybody like? What is the culture like? Will I work well with my boss? Will I enjoy the executive team, right? What are my colleagues like? So there's uncertainty about people and relationships, and an often overlooked area of uncertainty is around even the physical or the digital space that we're going to be occupying. So when you imagine what it is like for a new employee to begin a new job, you have to remember they're anxious about roles and responsibility, people and relationships, and physical and or, digital spaces. So in light of that, we have to do the little things, which actually aren't little. That's why they're in little quotes, right? The little things, we have to do those things well, because the worst thing that we can communicate is, oh, we forgot you were coming today, or, oh, this really crept up on me, or so sorry, we didn't have time to do that, or this. What new employees want to hear is, you all have been preparing for me to be here. And that says something to me about my belonging in the organization. So here are a couple of ideas, things that you can do to send this particular message in your week 1 experience. One, I highly recommend that you bring in a new employee or log them into Zoom, whatever it is, mid-morning on day 1, so that everybody else has time to get ready and get settled, and they're not having to sort of stand at the door of their manager, or awkwardly engage with somebody before everybody's on the Zoom meeting, right? That can make us feel like we're imposing on the rest of the organization. In fact, I talked to somebody at a conference last year. I was presenting on pre-boarding, so similar kind of topic. And this individual came in and said, I hated the first day of my job because I knew, I could tell, I could sense that my presence was really stressing out my manager, that he wasn't ready. There were things that he'd wanted to do that he hadn't done. And I felt guilty about that, almost as if I was imposing, right? So think about what that entrance experience is like for your new employees. And what you want to do is communicate to them, hey, we were expecting you. We've been ready for this. This is another kind of often overlooked area, which is communicate about where to park, how to access the building if you're talking about in-person employees, right? Or how to access your online spaces or programs. Doing that work during pre-boarding, right before day 1, is going to communicate to your new hires that, hey, we have a plan. Your presence here is not a surprise to us. Think about communicating to them who they're going to meet, what they might wear, what are we going to do for lunch? Should I bring something? What kind of things do I need to bring for my office, right? Those little things are actually communicating very powerful messages to the employee that their presence is not a surprise. You also similarly want to make sure that their physical space is move-in ready, and so that it's clean and organized. Your technology is already set up. And I know sometimes our IT teams, don't want to have to get things set up beforehand. And I feel like I can say that because I'm married to an IT person. But as much as you can, get those kind of things set up early so that your people feel like people have been thinking about me before I started on day 1. And then I just really am a big fan of making somebody feel welcome to the point that their space is decorated, maybe not over the top, but that there's extra effort put into showing that we're excited that you're here. We had a plan. We knew you were coming. And then finally, surprise them with something that they love. So this takes not a lot of effort. It means maybe on some of your onboarding forms, or maybe through your hiring manager, or through, your HR representative, that you're asking them what their favorite kind of morning, coffee or tea drink is, or what their favorite snack is, or their office supply. And then you're showing them that you have prepped for them before they got there, right? So this first message is really just doing the basics well. Sometimes people will say, well, that sounds really common sense, to which I say, well, just because something is, common sense doesn't mean it's a common practice, right? It doesn't mean that we do this well all the time. And when we know that only 1 in 10 employees are saying that we're doing a good job onboarding statistically, we definitely have some room to grow. So how can you in your process communicate to employees, we've been expecting you. We knew you were going to be here. We had a plan, right? So then the second message that we want to communicate during week 1 is, this is a special place and we do important work here. Okay. Now, this one is crucial to not just onboarding, but also to the ongoing kind of engagement and retention of your workforce, that we know that only currently in the US, only 4 in 10 employees strongly agree that the mission or purpose of their organization makes them feel that their job is important. Sometimes when I help organizations with their employee listening strategy, that's one of the offerings in my business, I'll help them assess their employee engagement and sort of listen to or conduct focus groups about, how employees are feeling about their jobs. And one of the things that I hear a lot from all employees is, yeah, we don't necessarily see how our role contributes to the overall vision and mission and values of the organization. And that always kind of, I say this, a lot of times your executives will be like clutching their pearls about that. Like, what? How is it? And that's exactly how they sound, by the way. No, I'm just kidding. But they'll say, what? We work so hard on vision and mission and values. And I will say, well, we're not hearing that. We're not hearing that employees feel connected to the vision, the mission, and the values, right? It's more than just having the, information posted on a conference room wall or even on an email signature. It's much, much more than that. We also know, similar to that statistic, that only 41% of employees strongly agree that they know what their company stands for and what makes it different from competitors. So when you're thinking about these two statistics, and we know that when you increase an employee's connection to the vision, the mission, the values of the organization, when that happens, engagement goes up, retention goes up, productivity goes up, all sorts of positive things happen. It really is a call to us to start sending those messages early and often. So I always will tell leaders that when it comes to onboarding, you really want to share your ethos or your ethos, which is really just the idea of what is the character and the nature and just the essence, if you will. Your vibe is one of my clients said that, yeah, your ethos is kind of like your vibe, sort of, right? Is how can you share that with your new hires during week one? And the reason that matters is because when we audit a lot of our week one experiences, it's a lot of compliance and, legal and checklists and safety trainings, and all of those things, of course, are so, so important. And we've got to get those things done. But when you audit your week one experience, if you're not seeing touch points where employees get to think about how they're connected to the vision, the mission of the organization, where they get to think about what makes this organization different, right? You're really leaving a lot on the table. Okay, so here are a couple of different ideas. Again, you're not going to be able to do all of these things. So I recommend, really trying to evaluate your own process and figuring out what's going to work well. But I love when during the onboarding phase, you have moments built in where employees, new hires, get to hear stories that kind of capture the vision, the mission, and the values of the organization. You can get really creative with this. And so I'm trying to monitor the chat. I love to see that it's active right now. And if you have good ideas for the way that you're sharing your, company ethos with your new employees, I'd love for you to put those in there. But you can get really creative. Some things that I've seen that work so well are storytelling sessions with founders. One time I was in a meeting with a group of like the executive team and a group of their middle level directors. And at one point, the CEO, who was also a co-owner, began sort of just retelling a story about some things that had happened at the very beginning of the company's formation. And I, a research nerd about all things organizational culture, I'm watching very closely how they're reacting. And those middle-level managers have what I like to call a very scientific term, googly eyes. As they were listening to this executive share some of these original stories. And afterwards, they said, we've never heard that. We had no idea, or we didn't realize how this really led to this. And it was a powerful moment, not only for those directors, but also for the CEO and the founder, who sort of realized, I've really taken this for granted. So it may not be that your founders or your CEO can have, a designated like hour spot on your HR onboarding timeline, but maybe you create really cool video, or maybe you create some kind of internal podcast that you can share with employees and new employees and have them listen to some of these stories. Get creative. Sorry, I've got like a hair that will not leave me alone. Create videos or again, some kind of, digital media highlighting the company's impact. Help your new hires feel connected to the work that you're doing, to support your clients, your customers, the products that you're creating. The more you can do during week 1 to really bolster their perception of the impact that they're going to have, the better. Customer testimonials and also employee testimonials around what your ethos is in the organization. Another thing I love for kind of sharing your ethos is inviting your new hires into some of your quirks, your traditions, your differentiating factors, and really helping them feel like they're not on the outside of a bunch of your inside jokes. Because one thing that happens a lot with newly onboarded employees is they will say things like, I can tell that everybody's really close here, or it seems like they're, everybody has a great relationship, but I sort of don't quite feel like I'm on the inside of that yet. So your inside jokes that you're sharing at the beginning of a meeting that are the reason why you love working for this organization can also be the very thing that makes that brand new hire feel like they're a little bit on the outside, right? And so we don't want that. So think critically about your rhythms, what makes your company, your organization really unique, and how can you invite your new hire into that? I'm going to give an example actually. So GoCo, who is the host of our webinar today, and thanks for that, Kaylee. GoCo has, and I'm sure they still do it, they have done it forever, but they have a tradition with their employees when they're a widely distributed, company. And so when they finish calls, they kind of have a way that they clap off, I'm doing this not great justice, but they do this really kind of fun and quirky tradition where one person sort of ends the Zoom meeting. And I have seen GoCo with new hires work very hard to prep them for that beforehand, but then also invite them to do that as a way to say, you belong here. And this is a part of our ethos. This is a part of our vibe, and we want you to be a part of it. So what are your differentiating factors? What are your traditions? What are your quirks? How can you invite new employees into that? So this message really is all about, connecting your new hires to the big stuff that you're doing, right? To again, the ethos of the organization. So that's message number 2. Okay, let's talk about message number 3, which is your contributions matter, and here's how you fit into the team. So when your new hires, let's say they show up and they feel like you aren't surprised that they're there or that they're logged into the Zoom call or whatever it is, they feel like you have a plan. They feel like, man, they've been thinking about me and, getting set up. They've prepared well for me. Wow, this place is really cool. They're doing important work here. I feel connected to the impact that they're having. Then a lot of the uncertainty that comes is, will I be successful? Will I kind of stack up? Will I be able to make contributions that matter, in this really cool organization that does really cool things? So it's important that we dial up our individualization efforts. All right. And so I want to share a research study with you. And this is, in my opinion, a really I think, groundbreaking research study. It's actually discussed in Daniel Cole's book, The Culture Code, as well. So if you've ever read that, it's a great read, by the way. If you work in people, culture, HR, The Culture Code, great read. But this study is described in that book as well. So what these researchers were interested in is they were wondering, what can we do during the onboarding phase of the employee life cycle? What can we do to increase retention years later? And so these researchers came in, and what they were doing is they were looking at the rhythms that an organization had during the onboarding phase. And so they took one group, they were bringing on cohorts, and so they had some larger groups of people to work with. And some of you may be really small organizations, and so you're not hiring in cohorts. But this group did have larger cohorts they were onboarding. And they had one group that was sort of like the control group, and they just did kind of business as usual with that group. So we're just doing a lot of orientation things, kind of typical, HR, paperwork, compliance, those kind of things, getting everybody set up and ready to go. That was their control group. Then they had a second group, or they actually call it group one. This group was a group that, in addition to what the control group got, they also got a lot of time during onboarding that was focused on vision and mission and values of the organization, which I've already told you is very important, right? So they really went all in on vision, mission, and values. And so they did a lot of the things that I was sharing with you to do on the last slide, right? So great stuff to do. But then they said, I wonder what would change if instead of, just the focus on the company and the values and the vision and the mission, what if we created this other group? And this other group, we're going to focus heavy on individual identity of this new hire, right? We're going to lean into a lot of individualization. And so with this group, what they did with the individualization group is they contextualized the vision, mission, values piece, right? Having to do with that particular individual and his or her strengths. And so in other words, they got those group of people together and said, hey, what unique, talents and strengths do you bring to the table that you think can contribute to our vision, our mission, and our values? Hey, what do you think you're most excited about when you look at your new job description? Where do you think you're going to be able to bring the most value to the team as a unique individual? So again, it may sound like a subtle difference, but that first group was really all about, here's why the company is amazing. And then the second group was, here's how you as a unique individual can fit into our vision, mission, and values, right? So what they found was that new employees from that second group, the individualization group, were 250% more likely than those from the first group to be with the company 7 months later. And that really held out actually over a longer period of time as well. That's not reported in the culture code, but it did hold out longer over a period of time. So what that means is, while it's so important that, and we know the research shows us, it's so important that we are focusing on vision, mission, values of the organization, it is also important that we are dialing up our individualization and our personalization efforts during onboarding. Okay. So here are just a couple of ways that you can kind of dial up, if you will, the individualization in your organization during onboarding. So one thing you can do is create some spaces, some opportunities during that week one experience where new hires get to reflect on their strengths and how they think that they can use those strengths in their new role, how those strengths connect to the vision, the missions, and the values of the organization. I'll give you an example. One of my clients has a very, they're more an agile kind of organization, and they're very, very passionate about being on the cutting edge, being very innovative. They employ a lot of Gen Z employees. And one of the things that they struggle with, which is often the case when you're talking about innovation and creativity, kind of ethos in an organization, is they struggle with processes and with getting kind of things streamlined and creating consistency, right? So I was able to work with one of the hiring managers around a key hire. And this hire was somebody who brought a lot of talent around streamlining and efficiency, and again, creating processes. So it was a really great addition to the team. So what that hiring manager was able to do is to look at that job description, sit down and look at that job description with the new hire during week one, even though they'd already seen the job description. We're going to look at it again, and we're going to kind of evaluate, where here in this role do you really feel like you can help us? And what was cool was that after that conversation, it was more googly eyes, or like little hard eyes, right? From the that individual, that new hire. And she said, I felt like, not that I was sort of imposing on this team, or that I was going to have to come in and kind of, like really fit into the team. It felt more like, wow, the team needs me. and what I can bring to the table. And that bolsters confidence, which is something that we want our new hires to feel. So create a space for them to reflect on their strengths and how it relates to the job and also to the vision and mission of the organization. This is another area where you can get really creative. Can you help have your marketing, your communication folks help you create social media posts, internal communication, or even a short video highlighting the uniqueness of your new team member? Now, this is the kind of thing that is so important, especially with your remote employees, your hybrid employees. I mean, it's important with everybody, but what the research shows is that this area right here of kind of belonging and feeling like I really fit into the team and I have unique contributions to make, that is particularly challenging for remote employees. And so a lot of times hybrid employees too. So these are things that you can do to really fight against, if you will, that perception for a lot of remote employees that nobody knows I'm here. I'm not connected to anybody. Nobody knows my experience or my background or the unique strengths I bring to the table. This is a way to really kind of combat that, combat may not be the right word, but really to kind of fight against that, to use strategic communication. And then another idea for individualization, and this one, again, it takes time to execute this, but the return on your investment is always there. And that is, ask leaders, so your hiring manager or this person's colleagues, to write short welcome notes or emails, but not just, hi, we're so glad you're here, but hey, we know that you bring this experience from your previous role, right? We know that you're very talented in this area, and this area. We've heard that you're an excellent public speaker, and we really need that on our team. So it's intentional messages designed to dial up individualization in your workplace, right? And so when you do that, when you dial up individualization, it bolsters the confidence of your new hires. It makes them feel like they really belong, and which they should, right? So you want to dial up individualization, but also, in addition to dialing up the individualization, you also want to be very clear about the roles and the responsibilities of the new hire, because here's some more sort of bad news, or just sort of discouraging, deflating news, is that in the United States, only 50% of employees say that they know what is expected of them at work. This is another stat that sometimes surprises executive leaders that I work with. They'll think, well, we've got job descriptions, or what do you mean? They've been in the role for 3 years. Why don't they know what's expected of them? But the reality is that we tend to be much worse at communicating expectations than we think we are as an organization. And this number actually drops to 30% when we're talking about scientific, technical, or computer-related jobs. So all that to say that when you're thinking about your new hire, they also need to know what success looks like. That's why I have a goalpost here. Where's the goalpost? What does success look like in this role? Because even if they've signed off on their, job description, that alone is not enough to feel like we really know what's expected of us. Okay. So here's some questions that you can ask yourself to really evaluate and sort of audit your process. Okay. So one, and you may be, by the way, you may be on this call and you're sort of you're representing HR, your people and culture function. You may be needing to use these questions to guide your managers, or executive leaders, or again, your organization is very unique. So you'll know who needs to be answering these questions. But one, during week one, have I or have we, talked through the job description with this new hire again? And have we discussed very explicitly how performance will be evaluated? In other words, have we communicated what success looks like? Okay. Does my new hire understand how their role contributes to our overall vision and mission? Have we, provided the tools, resources, or all the access needed to be successful? And what other expectations do we have that maybe we haven't communicated? And so when you work through these questions, you and your team or those other internal stakeholders or relevant parties here, what you're doing is you're ensuring that the new team member not only understands what the vision, mission, values of the organization are, how they're going to uniquely contribute, but also how they fit into the team, the role that they play, and what success looks like in that role. Okay, it's so important that you do this. Don't overlook it. It's another area where I see a lot of organizations leave a lot on the table. All right, message number 4 is we care about your growth and your well-being, because a lot of organizations during onboarding, they will spend a lot of time really kind of dialing in on growth and development opportunities, which is very important. We're going to talk more about that in a second. But they also forget that what the current research shows is that one of the biggest areas of concern for employees entering a new job is around the area of well-being and kind of work-life balance or work-life integration, or however you want to whatever you want to call that, right? So it's important that you strike a balance in your messaging during week 1. Look, we care about your growth and development, and yeah, we want to push you to grow and evolve and change and move up your career path, so to speak. But we also really care about you as a person and your well-being, right? So let's talk about growth and development first. So in I think it was 2016, I should have confirmed. I'm about 90% sure it was in 2016 that millennials overtook baby boomers in the workforce. Pretty sure it was 2016. And so what that means now is millennials are they're the biggest generation represented in the workforce. It's interesting because sometimes when I mention the idea of millennial, people still will sort of think, that's a 20-year-old, right? But your oldest millennials are in their 40s right now. So they represent the largest, group. And what we know that's very unique about millennials, and we're also seeing is accurate for Gen Z as well. So the younger generation that's rapidly entering the workforce, is that opportunities to learn and grow is listed as one of the top 3 factors in their retention, right? And it's the only aspect of retention that separates millennials from those of non-millennials, okay? So in other words, it behooves us to really, really emphasize our growth and development opportunities during onboarding. So here are a couple of ways that you could do that in your week 1 experience. 1, introduce all your new hires to available training and development initiatives across the employee life cycle. Okay. So this is not to say that you're giving them all of the training and development. You wouldn't be able to do that. But what this is saying is, hey, this is what it means to be an employee at our organization, is we're going to grow and develop you in all of these different ways across the employee life cycle. Okay. Here are initiatives where you can see all along the way that we really, really care about you, right? So introduce those. Share stories of employees who have developed inside of your organization. That actually is a very underrated way to communicate your ethos or your vibe, is to show your new hires employees who have already developed. Pair them with a mentor. I've seen, and again, the chat is moving so fast and that just pumps me up so much. And it looks like you're all sharing resources and I love that. And keep going with that. But one thing I did notice was somebody say something earlier about mentors and kind of buddies. That is an incredible way to highlight development opportunities, mentorship in the workplace. And then I'm very biased, but my personal favorite is to let them know, kind of sneak peek, if you will, an individual development plan. Now, if you're unfamiliar with an individual development plan, I have a resource for you I'll share in just a moment. But an individual development plan is not to be confused with kind of performance evaluation tool. An individual development plan is a tool that is kind of co-created between typically the manager and the employee. And it's a tool that's meant to really help the employee think about how they want to grow and how they want to evolve in their career, skills they'd like to acquire, things they'd like to learn, ways they'd like to stretch themselves. And so organizations that use individual development plans or IDPs are investing in their employees, not just to the end that it benefits them in their particular role, but also that it shows them, this is what it means to grow in general in your career. Okay. And so you could, during your first week, your onboarding week with employees, share with them, hey, at 6 months, once you've been here 6 months, or once you've been here 3 months, or whatever it is, this is a tool that we're going to use to really focus on your unique growth and development in the organization and beyond. So I have a download. It's housed on my website, and you can download that. I've got a QR code there if you'd like to download it. Also, there's just the actual web address, but it's just leannelagasse.com, /IDP. And this is a document, a template that you could use. You can download that and, see, hey, is this a tool that we could use in our organization? But I will tell you that the clients that I work with, when they use this during onboarding, again, they're not filling it out during onboarding, but they're sneak peeking it during onboarding to say, this is the kind of development that you're going to receive here in our organization. So feel free to download that. You can shoot me an email if you have any trouble accessing it, but I'd love for you to use that and see if you could leverage it in your own onboarding practices. And I'll share it again at the end as well. All right. So in addition to the growth and the development piece, right, we also want to send the message. We don't just care about the growth and development. We also care about your work-life balance, about your, just your general mental and emotional health too. So over 60% of employees currently cite greater work-life balance and better personal well-being as very important. Now, I know that kind of looks maybe it looks kind of blah on the computer screen, but what that says is that most people in the United States, when they come into a new job, one of the things that matters to them more than anything else is, how is this job going to work with the rest of my life? We also know that that is even more the case with female employees. Typically, again, you can't put everybody in a box, but the research does show that that tends to be even more of a concern for female employees than it does for male employees. So we know that that work-life balance really matters. So what are some ways during your week 1 experience that you can prioritize or communicate to employees that you're prioritizing balance and well-being? Well, 1, you can be very upfront with expectations and norms around work-life balance, rest rhythms, flexible work options, etc. When I presented this at a conference not terribly long ago, I had a leader come up to me afterwards and say that one of the things that impressed her the most when she started her new job was, she said, one of the executives told me, around here, we don't expect you to answer emails over the weekend. And she said it was a very simple sentence, but what it said to me was, I can breathe a little bit, about what it means to be an employee here. And so whatever that looks like for your culture, you may have employees who are working over the weekends, and that's a part of their regular rhythms. But what can you do to establish clear expectations and norms around work-life balance, rest rhythms, flexible work options, etc.? This is a big one that often gets overlooked, is actually promoting the benefits that you offer. And I have sort of listed here on the screen what is the Gallup organization's 5 elements of well-being. We could do an entire webinar on just this. So what I'll tell you is another book recommendation is Gallup has a book that is about these 5 elements of well-being. And so it's a fantastic read as well. Just search, Gallup well-being, and you'll find it. It's a fantastic read if you're in the people, culture, or HR space, because it's going to show you a more holistic view of how employees think about their well-being. A lot of times organizations, when they think about well-being, they think primarily about the physical well-being. But what Gallup's research shows is actually multifaceted, right? And they're all sort of integrated, and they kind of all impact one another. So physical, career well-being, community well-being, your social well-being, and also financial well-being. So for example, if your organization has employee resource groups, making sure that during your onboarding that you're highlighting and you're emphasizing, hey, we care about your community. We've got these employee resource groups that we'd love you to check out. Or maybe you offer a financial planning session, and it's hidden in like, paragraph 5 in your employee handbook, but you're not actually taking the time to really promote that and say, hey, here at our organization, we care about your financial well-being. This is a service or a benefit that we're providing you, or we have a gym membership, or there's counseling available, or employee assistance programs, or tools or apps that we use. One really cool area of emerging research in a lot of kind of industrial organizational psychology is around mindfulness in the workplace. And so there's one organization I know that has an app that they use that it kind of prompts employees to take breaks for deep breathing and just for mindfulness during the day. And they've actually seen really cool, kind of results from that and gotten really good feedback about it. So Jennifer, I just saw your question. The chat stopped momentarily for me to see Jennifer said, what is a rest rhythm? So a rest rhythm would be, what are the just embedded kind of norms that we have for when we're working and when we're not working. So organizations that have good rest rhythms are those just like the one I shared, who would say, hey, unless there's sort of an emergency, we really do not expect you to answer work, emails over the weekend, or when you clock out, at 5 o'clock or whatever it is, we really expect that you don't feel accountable to do X, Y, and Z until you show back up to the next day. So every organization is different, right, in terms of your rest rhythms. Okay, prioritizing balance and well-being. Let me see. I think I covered everything I wanted to do there. Essentially, what we're saying on this one is don't assume that because, you have these benefits available that your employees know about it. In fact, one of my clients not too long ago, we went through an employee engagement survey, and one of the things that they heard back was employees on some open-ended questions were saying, it'd be really great if our insurance was like this, and if we did this, and if we could do that, and all the things that we hear on those surveys. But some of the leaders were going, wait a minute, we do that, and we have that, and what do you mean they do have access to that? And so at that point, we got to start talking about, well, now what this means is a failure to communicate that you have those benefits. So make sure you promote them during that week 1. All right. And so that brings us to our 5th and final question or 5th and final message that we want to communicate during week 1. And that is, hey, we're curious what you think and see so far. This is an overlooked one as well. And this is really rooted in the reality that most employees, in fact, only 3 out of 10, believe that their opinions don't count at work. And that is also true for our newly onboarded employees. So what you want to do as an organization is communicate that, hey, here at, X organization, we care about the feedback that you give us. We really want to hear. We want that upward communication to flow, right? So what are some things that we can do to amplify the employee voice? Because highly engaged employees, those are the most enthusiastic and committed and involved in their work, they are 3 times more likely to say that they feel heard at their workplaces. 74% of employees report that they're more effective at their job when they feel heard. That should not surprise us. And also, employee listening is really also related to financial performance in organizations. So when employees feel that they're heard, those organizations tend to outperform their competitors in all sorts of ways, right? So there is definitely a mandate for us to engage in in employee listening. But what are some ways that you can do that during week 1? Because you may think, well, they've just been here just 1 week. But I love when leaders will implement and embed some listening posts, if you will, during that week 1 experience. So you can do something like use a pulse survey to assess their experience, discover unanswered questions. That allows you to iterate in real time and then ultimately make some data-informed decisions. So I have a client that they have a larger organization, and so they were onboarding a lot of employees, and they have a lot of kind of tutorials and online modules and things that their employees were going through. And what they saw was over time a decline in effectiveness when they were asked, when they asked these employees, hey, what was this effective, and did you feel prepared for your role? And they slowly started seeing sort of a decline in it. And when they dug, one of the employees finally said, well, those videos, like the quality is old. It just looks old. It just kind of seemed like maybe it was made 7 or 8 years ago. And it was funny because they actually could see the declining, effectiveness of the video. And so all they did was they said, well, let's just re-record them. They didn't really change even the content. It was mostly the aesthetics and the design in the office. And then they see the boost, right? So sometimes it's just as simple as asking the questions to, to see how we can iterate in real time. Okay. And then ultimately what you want to do when you're assessing your onboarding experience is create some more spaces for upward communication to flow. So asking new hires, about the questions that they have, sharing feedback during orientation sessions, highlighting channels and tools that they have for communication, and also another underrated strategy, asking new hires to share their insights about your processes and your culture and what are you noticing so far? Because a lot of times those brand new employees they see a lot that we don't, because we're kind of in the culture. And so they are a fresh set of eyes. They have some objectivity that we don't have anymore as, internal stakeholders. So asking them to really, really give you some of that feedback is just an incredible way to also send the message, we care about your experience. And that really is the overall goal of all 5 of these messages, is that at the end of that week, that first week, what they're feeling is, man, this organization prepared for my arrival, right? They are doing incredible work. They're having incredible impact. They have shown me that my contributions matter, and they have been clear with me about what success looks like in my role, right? They are showing me that they care about my well-being and that they're going to invest in my growth and development. And they care what I think. I've been here less than a week and they care about what I think. And so this question right here on this slide is one that is just a guiding question for you to say, when you think about that new hire going home or logging off or whatever it is, what do you want them to communicate to their loved ones, to their families, to their partners, to their roommates? What do you want them communicating at dinner? That, well, I filled out some online tutorial, or I did some online tutorials today. I kind of sat in a room by myself. The office wasn't ready. Everybody seemed surprised I was there. Or, wow, this organization has invested so much in my employee experience, in my onboarding experience. That, my friends, is how you pave the way for engagement and retention and leave a lasting impression on your employees. So with that, I want to just tell you how much I've enjoyed being here today. And I'm going to pass it to Kaylee real quick. And then depending on how we're doing, we may have some time for questions, which we don't always do because I'm not always the best at the time management. So Kaylee, I'll pass it to you. Here's the QR code again, in case you'd like to download that IDP template. Kaylee, thanks so much. It's all yours.
Of course, and I'll also include the IDP in my follow-up email that I'll send to everyone with the recording and the slides. If you're interested to learn more about GoCo, who is the sponsor of today's webinar, you can go to goco.io/coffee, schedule a consultation with one of our GoCo experts, and we'll send you a gift card for a free coffee on us. So I'm about to share the SHRM and HRCI codes again in the chat. So please feel free to use that. And yeah, it looks like we do have a little bit of time for some questions, LeAnne. So let me go through. The first one I saw a couple times is, we're getting so many great ideas from this webinar, but there's just a big question of getting buy-in from the executives for the initiatives. I mean, even something as small as a tumbler for each new employee, depending on the size of your company, could get pretty costly. So how do you suggest going about that executive buy-in, even though I know this could be a whole webinar all on its own?
Haley, it's such a good question. And here is the truth. I think every single time I do a webinar or a keynote for HR, people and culture leaders, this is the prevailing question, is about buy-in. So actually, we did a webinar on how to get executive buy-in. So if you searched, I don't know it off the top of my head, but GoCo executive buy-in, you could probably find it. Kaylee might be able to find it quickly and share it. So there's an entire webinar that I did just on how to use kind of persuasive strategy to build a case. But what I would say in general with executive level leaders, who is often who you're having to make, having to get buy-in for, and also for your managers, is they have to feel, right? And this is true, but they have to feel, we have to frame the message in such a way that those leaders feel like they personally benefit from this initiative. Now that's tricky because, everybody's evaluated in different ways. What success looks like for all of these different roles is different. That's why audience analysis is so important. But in my experience, when it comes to convincing executive leaders, it's like 80% about the audience analysis and figuring out what are the unique pain points for this person as it relates to our organizational health or organizational, operations or performance. If you can't do that, your persuasive messages will fall flat. The other thing I will say, though, is to your point, Kaylee, about the Tumblr. Sometimes, I think when leaders, like if you're an executive and you hear, oh, we're going to revamp onboarding. Yeah, you're just here like thinking dollar signs. But if you look back at most of what we covered today, a lot of it isn't even spending dollars. It is the communication and the messages that you're sending. So if you can show that, look, by us spending time revamping, yeah, there's going to be some cost associated with that. But the bulk of the work that we're doing is really more about like leadership and manager alignment around the messages we send. That's going to make a tremendous difference. But I saw you just shared that webinar. So you're like, go check out another hour of me talking about executive buy-in. But there is a lot of good stuff in there. Again, I'm very biased, but it might be helpful.
No, that was your first webinar that we did together when I joined GoCo, LeAnne. So it holds a special place in my heart. No, that was great. Thank you so much. We have a bunch of other questions, but I feel like we have time for one more. How do you ensure a consistent onboarding experience across such a diverse workforce? Locations, demographics, remote, in person, that it can vary from organization to organization. So how do you ensure consistency?
Oh, again, such a good question. Couple of things. One, I would say if you are talking about a really diverse workforce where maybe you do have some remote or hybrid or, distributed workforces, one, which is very difficult for HR and people leaders, is we may have to just let go of the ideal that there will be perfect consistency. And the reason for that is because each employee group has unique needs. So, I shared earlier that for remote employees, there are a lot of needs that aren't as prevalent as that your face-to-face employees may not have. And so in that case, we may have to dial up some efforts over here that this employee group doesn't need. So it's similar to your customer journeys. When you segment your customers and you say, look, these individuals, here's how they find us. This is what they need. These are their pain points. These are the messages we're going to send. These are the things that we need even logistically to get them onboarded as customers, right? This group over here came to us totally differently. So it's the same thing. It's sort of employee segmenting. And my recommendation is to build an employee journey for different types of groups. Now, everybody's not going to fit in one perfect little box, but what you can do is get strategic about what's unique around each one of these different employee groups. And so what their experience could be like. And there's ramps that are going to connect, right? Like we need, there's paperwork we need from every employee, regardless if they're face-to-face or remote employee, but there are a lot of things where there's not going to be consistency. And I think that's okay.
Amazing. Well, thank you, LeAnne. That's about it for time, but just wanted to remind everyone, I'll be sending the recording, the slides, and LeAnne's IDP link out to everyone today. I loved all of the chat that was going on throughout the webinar and all the great ideas shared. And LeAnne, of course, thank you as always for joining us today. We so appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Kaylee. And I think that we need to give Stacy her own webinar so that she, I think Stacy, wherever you are, I think we need a webinar. So thanks so much for your generosity and sharing. And everybody is wonderful to be with you today. And I hope to see you again soon.
Sounds good. Thank you, everyone. I hope you have a great rest of your week, and we'll see you soon. Bye.
Bye, everyone.